Hey, stop scrolling for a second. A billionaire ran out of his own mansion gates because a maid was crying against the wall. His fiancée just stood there, arms crossed, and said nothing. But what that maid whispered to him next, it didn't just end an engagement. It exposed a secret that had been hidden inside that mansion for 3 years. Stay with me. This gets unbelievable. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from today? Which country do you call home? Drop it in the comments. I always love seeing how far this little corner of the internet reaches. Today's story is one of the most emotional ones we've ever told. About power, pride, and a secret that money could never bury. It's heartwarming, it's heavy, and by the end, I promise you'll feel something you didn't expect. Let's get into it. The rain had just started when Daniel Whitfield's black car rolled through the iron gates of his Long Island estate. He wasn't supposed to be home this early. His assistant had cleared his afternoon for a call with investors in Singapore, but the meeting ended early and something, he couldn't explain what, made him tell his driver to take him straight home instead of back to the office. Daniel Whitfield was 38 years old, and by every measure that mattered to the world, he had everything. He was the founder of Whitfield Dynamics, a tech company that had, in less than a decade, become one of the most talked about names in Silicon Valley. Forbes had put him on their cover twice. His net worth crossed $2 billion the year he turned 35. He had a 22-room mansion on the North Shore, 3 cars nobody had ever seen him drive twice, and a fiancée, Victoria Sinclair, who looked like she'd stepped out of a magazine every single day of her life. From the outside, Daniel's life looked like a dream nobody wakes up from. But dreams, as it turns out, can be very good at hiding things. As the car slowed near the front gate, Daniel noticed something odd. A woman was sitting against the stone wall just outside the entrance, her knees pulled to her chest, her uniform soaked through from the rain. Even from a distance, he recognized the deep maroon color of the housekeeping staff uniform. It was Amara. Amara Johnson had worked for the Whitfield estate for almost 3 years. She was quiet, always polite, always early, always the one who remembered small things, like which mug Daniel liked his coffee in, or that he hated when the curtains in his study were left open past 6 in the evening. She was one of 11 staff members who kept the estate running, but if you asked anyone in that house who they trusted the most would say her name. Daniel had never seen her cry. Not once. Not in 3 years. "Stop the car," he said. His driver, Marcus, looked at him through the rearview mirror, surprised. "Sir." "Stop the car, Marcus. Now." The car hadn't even fully stopped before Daniel opened the door and stepped out into the rain, his $3,000 suit soaking through in seconds. He didn't care. Something about the way Amara was curled against that wall, small, shaking, trying so hard to be invisible, pulled at something in him that he hadn't felt in a long time. "Amara!" She flinched at the sound of his voice, quickly wiping her face with the back of her hand, trying to stand, trying to compose herself the way staff are trained to do in front of the people they work for. "Mr. Whitfield, I'm so sorry, I was just—" "Don't apologize," Daniel said, crouching down to her level, ignoring the rain soaking through his knees. "Tell me what happened. Right now." That's when the front door of the mansion opened. Victoria Sinclair stepped out onto the marble steps in a yellow gown that probably cost more than Amara made in 6 months. Her arms were crossed. Her face was unreadable. She didn't rush toward them. She didn't ask what was wrong. She just stood there, watching, waiting. And in that one silent moment, something inside Daniel, something he had ignored for a long time, finally cracked open. Because the way Victoria looked at Amara in that moment wasn't confusion. It was guilt. Daniel had met Victoria at a charity gala 2 years earlier. She was the daughter of a hedge fund manager, educated at Wellesley, fluent in 3 languages, and could work a room better than anyone he'd ever seen. Their relationship moved fast. Dinners, trips to Paris, a ring within 18 months. To the outside world, they were the perfect power couple. Magazines loved them. Investors loved them. Even his own mother, who was famously hard to impress, had told him Victoria was exactly the kind of woman a man like you needs. But lately something had felt off. Small things. Amara flinching whenever Victoria walked into a room. Staff members suddenly quitting without explanation. A housekeeper named Rosa who had worked there for 6 years. Gone within a week, no goodbye, no notice. Daniel had brushed it off as staff turnover. Big houses like his always had turnover. That's what he told himself. Now, kneeling in the rain beside a woman who was shaking, not from cold but from something deeper. He wasn't so sure anymore. "Amara, please," he said gently. "Tell me what happened." She looked past him toward the porch, toward Victoria, and something in her eyes shifted. Fear, yes, but also exhaustion. The exhaustion of someone who had been carrying a secret far too long. "I can't, sir. I need this job. Please just let me go home." "You're not going anywhere until someone tells me what's going on in my own house." Victoria's voice cut through the rain from the porch. Calm, controlled, almost bored. "Daniel, darling, come inside. You're going to catch a cold standing out there. The staff have disagreements sometimes, it's nothing." "Disagreements don't leave people crying in the rain, Victoria." For the first time since he'd known her, Daniel saw something flicker across Victoria's face that he'd never seen before. Panic. It was there for less than a second before she smoothed it back into that practiced calm she wore like armor. But Daniel had built a $2 billion company by reading rooms. Reading people. Reading the split-second truths that flash across someone's face before they remember to hide them. And what he saw on Victoria's face in that split second wasn't the look of a woman confused by staff drama. It was the look of a woman who knew exactly what was about to come out, and was terrified of it. "Amara," Daniel said quietly, turning back to her. "I'm not going inside. I'm not moving from this spot until you tell me the truth. Whatever it is. I promise you, on everything I have, nothing bad will happen to you for telling me." Amara looked at him for a long moment, rain running down both their faces, and for the first time in 3 years, she stopped trying to be invisible. "It's about your father's will, Mr. Whitfield," she whispered. "And it's about a little boy named Elijah." The rain seemed to go quiet around him. "What did you just say?" The name hit Daniel like a physical blow. Elijah. His father, Robert Whitfield, had passed away 4 years earlier. A heart attack in his sleep, sudden and quiet, the kind of death that leaves too many things unsaid. Daniel had inherited the company, the estate, everything. The will had been simple, straightforward, handled by the family's longtime lawyer. There had been no surprises, no mysteries, or so he had believed for 4 years. "Amara," he said carefully. "Who is Elijah?" She hesitated, glancing again toward the porch, where Victoria now stood frozen, her composed mask slipping further with every second. "6 months ago," Amara said, her voice trembling but steady, "I was cleaning the East Wing library, the one your father used before he passed. Nobody uses it anymore, so it doesn't get much attention. I found a locked drawer in his old desk. It had come loose from the frame, and when I went to fix it, some old papers fell out." "What papers?" "Letters, Mr. Whitfield. Dozens of them. Between your father and a woman named Grace Bennett. And medical records. And a birth certificate." Daniel felt his chest tighten. A birth certificate for who? Amara's eyes filled with tears again, but this time they weren't tears of fear. They were tears of someone finally being allowed to tell a truth they'd been forced to carry alone. For a boy named Elijah Bennett. Born 11 years ago. Father listed as Robert Whitfield. The world seemed to tilt sideways under Daniel's feet. "That's not possible," he said, though even as the words left his mouth, he wasn't sure he believed them. His father had been a private man in his later years, often traveling for months at a time for what he called business retreats. Daniel had never questioned it. Why would he? His father was 70 years old when he passed, married to Daniel's mother for over 30 years before she passed away from cancer when Daniel was 26. "There's more," Amara whispered. "The letters mention that your father set up a trust for the boy and his mother, separate from the main estate, meant to be revealed after his death. But it was never activated because the lawyer handling it, the same lawyer who read your father's public will, never filed the second document." Why would he not file it? Amara's next words came out barely above a whisper, and they were the words that would change everything. Because Victoria paid him not to. Daniel felt like the ground had opened beneath him. He turned slowly toward the porch, toward the woman he had planned to marry in 4 months, the woman whose face was now pale, whose composed mask had completely shattered, whose silence in that moment said more than any confession ever could. "Victoria," he said, his voice barely recognizable to himself. "Is this true?" For a long, terrible moment she said nothing. Then, quietly, she said the words that confirmed it. "I did it for us, Daniel. For our future. That woman and her son were never supposed to be part of your father's legacy. I was protecting what's ours." The rain had softened to a drizzle, but nobody moved. Daniel stood between the two women who had, in different ways, shaped the last few years of his life, one who had hidden a secret out of fear, and one who had buried it out of greed. "Protecting what's ours," Daniel repeated slowly, the words tasting bitter in his mouth. "There is an 11-year-old boy out there who is my brother, Victoria. My father's son. And you erased him because you were worried about a trust fund." "Half-brother," Victoria corrected coldly, as if that made any difference at all. "An illegitimate one, born from an affair your father was too weak to control. Do you understand what would have happened if that story got out while we were planning our wedding? The press would have torn us apart. Your father's legacy would have been destroyed. I did what needed to be done to protect this family." "This isn't your family to protect," Daniel said, his voice shaking now, not from cold but from something far deeper. "And you didn't protect anyone. You stole a life from a child who never asked to be part of any of this. You bribed a lawyer. You buried a trust fund meant for a mother raising a boy alone. And you let an innocent woman," he turned to Amara, "live in fear for 6 months because she happened to find the truth before you could hide it forever." Victoria's composure cracked completely now. "I did it because I love you, Daniel. Because I wanted a life with you that wasn't complicated by your father's mistakes." "You didn't do it for me," Daniel said quietly. "You did it for the version of me that comes with a clean legacy and a bigger inheritance. That's not love, Victoria. That's an investment." He turned back to Amara, who was still trembling, though now it seemed to be less from fear and more from the sheer release of finally saying the truth out loud. "Amara, I need you to tell me everything. Where is this boy now? Where is his mother?" Amara wiped her eyes and nodded. "Ms. Sinclair found out I discovered the papers about 4 months ago. She threatened to have me fired and blacklisted from every staffing agency in the state if I told anyone. She said nobody would believe a housekeeper over her word. I was scared, Mr. Whitfield. Have 2 kids of my own. Couldn't lose this job. But I couldn't keep living with it either. Today when I saw her I just broke. I couldn't hold it in anymore." Daniel closed his eyes for a moment, absorbing everything. The betrayal, the years of an ultimately fake relationship, the existence of a brother he never knew he had, and the quiet courage of a woman who had risked everything she had to finally tell the truth. When he opened his eyes, something in him had changed. The uncertainty was gone. "Rosa," he said suddenly, turning to Amara. "The housekeeper who quit 6 months ago. Did she know too?" Amara nodded. "She found out before I did. I think that's why she left so suddenly." Daniel looked at Victoria one final time, and this time there was no anger in his eyes. Only a cold, quiet clarity. "Take off the ring, Victoria. And get out of my house. Word travels fast in circles like the one Daniel and Victoria moved in. But he didn't care. Within an hour of that confrontation in the rain, Victoria had packed 2 suitcases with the help of a staff member who avoided eye contact the entire time, and left the estate in a car her own family had sent, not Daniel's. The engagement was over. Just like that. 2 years, gone with a single confession outside a mansion gate. But Daniel didn't have time to sit with the heartbreak because there was something far more important that needed his attention. A boy named Elijah, who had a right to know who his father was, and a mother who had spent over a decade raising him alone, likely without ever fully understanding why the promised support never came. That night, after changing out of his soaked suit and sitting Amara down with a hot cup of tea and an assurance, a real one, backed by a signed letter guaranteeing her job security regardless of what happened next, Daniel called his lawyer, Harold Weiss, a different one from the family's longtime attorney. "I need everything on a woman named Grace Bennett," Daniel said. "And I need to know why a trust meant for her and her son was never filed after my father's death." It took 3 days of digging, but the truth came out layer by layer, uglier each time. The family's longtime lawyer, a man named Preston Cole who had served the Whitfield family for over 20 years, had indeed been paid by Victoria, nearly $200,000, to quietly bury the second will. He had, in a moment of desperation Daniel would later learn was fueled by his own gambling debts, agreed. Grace Bennett, it turned out, had worked as an event planner for one of Robert Whitfield's charity galas 14 years earlier. Their relationship had been brief but real, according to the letters. Not the tabloid affair narrative Victoria had painted it as. Robert had genuinely cared for her, had wanted to be part of Elijah's life, but had been terrified of the scandal it would bring to the company and to Daniel's mother, who was still alive and battling cancer at the time. By the time Daniel's mother passed away, Robert had finally decided to make things right, updating his will, setting up the trust, planning to introduce Elijah to Daniel after enough time had passed to do it gently. He never got the chance. He died before he could tell anyone. And for 4 years, an 11-year-old boy had grown up not knowing his father had loved him. Not knowing a fortune existed with his name quietly written into it. Not knowing he had a brother. Daniel sat in his study that night, staring at a photograph he had never seen before, one tucked inside his father's letters. It showed Robert Whitfield, laughing, holding a baby wrapped in a blue blanket, sitting on a park bench somewhere in Brooklyn. His father looked happier in that photo than Daniel had ever seen him look in any family portrait taken at the estate. "I have a brother," Daniel whispered to the empty room. "And I almost never knew." Finding Grace Bennett wasn't difficult once Daniel's team had her full name and old address. She still lived in the same modest 2-bedroom apartment in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, where she'd raised Elijah his entire life, working as an event coordinator for a mid-sized firm, the kind of steady, unglamorous job that pays the bills but never quite gets ahead. Daniel didn't send a lawyer. He didn't send an assistant. He went himself alone on a quiet Saturday morning, wearing jeans and a plain jacket instead of one of his signature suits, because he understood, perhaps for the first time in years, that this wasn't a business matter. This was family. Grace opened the door and froze the moment she saw him. She didn't need an introduction. The resemblance to Robert Whitfield, especially around the eyes, was unmistakable. "You're his son," she said quietly. "Robert's son." "Daniel," he said. "And I think you might know why I'm here." Grace's eyes filled with tears, and for a moment, Daniel thought she might close the door. 11 years of silence, of waiting for a call that never came, of raising a child alone while quietly wondering if the man she loved had simply walked away. That kind of pain doesn't heal just because someone finally shows up on your doorstep. "He never abandoned you," Daniel said gently before she could speak. "I found the letters. Found everything. My father loved you. He loved Elijah. He was trying to make things right before he passed, and he ran out of time. What happened after that? The missing trust, the silence, that wasn't him. That was someone else's doing." And I'm here to fix it. Grace's hand went to her mouth, and behind her, from somewhere inside the apartment, a young voice called out, "Mom? Who is it?" A boy appeared in the doorway. 11 years old, dark curly hair, and the same brown eyes Daniel saw every morning in the mirror. Elijah looked between his mother and the stranger at the door with the curious caution kids have when they sense something important is happening but don't yet understand what. Daniel crouched down slightly. The way he'd learned watching Amara comfort her own children on video calls she sometimes took during breaks. "Hi, Elijah," he said, his voice unexpectedly thick with emotion. "My name is Daniel. I think we're brothers." The boy's eyes went wide. "Like real brothers?" "Real brothers," Daniel confirmed, smiling through tears he didn't bother hiding. "Same dad." Elijah looked at his mother, who nodded through her own tears, and then, in the unguarded, uncomplicated way only children can manage, he simply asked, "Do you want to see my room? I have a really cool telescope." Daniel laughed. A real laugh, one that came from somewhere deep in his chest that hadn't been used in a very long time. "I would love to see your telescope." That afternoon, sitting on the floor of an 11-year-old's bedroom in Brooklyn, looking through a second-hand telescope at nothing in particular because it was still daylight outside, Daniel Whitfield felt something he hadn't felt in the sprawling 22 rooms of his mansion in years. He felt like he was home. Over the following weeks, Daniel worked with his legal team to correct what should have happened 4 years earlier. The trust his father had established for Grace and Elijah was finally activated, not out of guilt or obligation, but because it was simply, undeniably, the right thing to do. It wasn't a small gesture. It was millions of dollars, enough to ensure Elijah's education, enough to give Grace the freedom to work not because she had to, but because she wanted to. But money, Daniel quickly realized, wasn't really what mattered most to either of them. Grace turned down the idea of moving into anything flashy. She kept her job at least for now, though she did allow Daniel to help her buy the modest brownstone she'd been renting for years instead of continuing to pay rent to a landlord who barely maintained the building. What mattered more was the relationship. Daniel began visiting every weekend. He learned that Elijah loved astronomy, hated broccoli, and was surprisingly gifted at chess, good enough that he'd already beaten every kid in his after-school club. He learned that Grace had never once spoken badly about Robert Whitfield to their son, despite everything, because she believed a child deserved to grow up without bitterness poisoning his understanding of where he came from. "I always told him his father loved him," Grace said one evening, sitting on her small back porch with Daniel as Elijah practiced free throws in the tiny backyard. "I didn't know how to explain the rest. I didn't want him growing up angry." "You did an incredible job with him," Daniel said. "I mean that." Meanwhile, back at the estate, Daniel had also begun rebuilding something else. His relationship with the truth about the people around him. Preston Cole, the family lawyer who had accepted Victoria's bribe, was quietly but firmly removed from handling any Whitfield family matters, and Daniel made sure, through entirely legal means, that his actions would carry consequences within the legal community. Victoria attempted to reach out twice in the weeks that followed, first through a lengthy text message insisting she'd only ever acted out of love, and later through a mutual friend who tried to arrange a meeting. Daniel declined both. There are some bridges, he had come to understand, that shouldn't be rebuilt, because what they were built on was never trust to begin with. And then there was Amara. Daniel called her into his study one afternoon, and for a moment, old fear flickered across her face, the instinctive worry of someone used to bad news following a summons from someone with power over her livelihood. "You're not in trouble," Daniel said quickly, seeing it. "I actually wanted to thank you. What you did, telling me the truth, even though it terrified you, even though you had every reason to stay quiet, that took more courage than anything I've done in my entire career." Amara's eyes welled up again, though this time the tears were different. "I just couldn't keep carrying it anymore, Mr. Whitfield." "Please," Daniel said. "Call me Daniel. And I want you to know, your job here is permanent. with a raise you should have gotten years ago. But more than that, I want you to know that what you did changed my life. You gave me back a piece of my family I didn't even know was missing." 6 months passed. The rain-soaked afternoon at the estate's front gate felt like a lifetime ago, though Daniel thought about it often. How close he had come to walking past Amara that day. How a cancelled meeting and a strange, unexplainable urge to come home early had unraveled a secret that had been buried for years. Elijah had settled into a comfortable rhythm of visiting the estate every other weekend. He'd made fast friends with the estate's groundskeeper's dog, a golden retriever named Biscuit, and had claimed one of the smaller guest rooms as his room, without anyone officially declaring it so. It simply became understood. Daniel had converted a section of the East Wing library, the very room where Amara had found the hidden letters, into a small observatory space for Elijah, complete with a proper telescope Daniel had researched obsessively for weeks to make sure it was exactly right. "You didn't have to do all this," Grace told him one Saturday evening, watching Elijah excitedly point out constellations through the new telescope while Daniel stood beside him, nodding along even though he barely knew Orion's belt from the Big Dipper. "I wanted to," Daniel said simply. "For years I thought I understood what family meant. Turns out I didn't understand it at all until 6 months ago." There was something else that had changed in Daniel during those months. Something less visible but perhaps more important. He'd started spending less time at the office, delegating more to his executive team, something his board had initially worried about until they saw the company's culture, and oddly its numbers, actually improve under the new arrangement. He'd started eating dinner at a normal hour instead of grabbing something between calls. He'd started, for the first time in years, actually living instead of just performing a life for other people to admire from a distance. The mansion itself felt different too. Where it once felt like a museum, beautiful, cold, and untouched, it now had the occasional scattered basketball in the hallway, a half-finished 500-piece puzzle on the sunroom table that Elijah and Amara's own 2 kids had started working on together during a weekend Grace had let them visit, and laughter echoing through rooms that had been silent for far too long. Word of the story eventually reached the press, though not through any leak or scandal. Daniel chose to share it himself in a carefully written statement because he'd decided he was done letting other people control the narrative of his family. "My father made mistakes, as we all do," the statement read in part. "But he also loved deeply, and that love deserves to be honored rather than hidden. I'm grateful, more than words can express, to have found my brother, and to the brave woman who made sure the truth couldn't stay buried forever." The public response was overwhelmingly warm. But Daniel found he cared less about the public response and more about the small, quiet moments. Elijah falling asleep on the car ride home after a long day, Grace's laughter finally sounding lighter, Amara's own children calling him Uncle Daniel, without anyone ever officially deciding that was allowed either. It was almost exactly a year after that rainy afternoon when Daniel decided to hold a small gathering at the estate. Not a gala, not a press event, nothing with cameras or seating charts. Just people who mattered. Grace and Elijah came, of course. Amara and her husband and their 2 children came as guests this time, not staff. A handful of close friends who had stood by Daniel through the messy fallout of his broken engagement came too. Even Marcus, his driver, was there. No longer just an employee but someone Daniel had come to consider a genuine friend after everything that had happened. The garden behind the mansion, usually reserved for photograph charity events, was set up simply. String lights, a long wooden table, food that Elijah had specifically requested, including, somehow, broccoli, which he now claimed to tolerate a little bit after months of Grace's gentle insistence. Daniel stood at the edge of the garden for a moment before the dinner began, watching everyone settle into their seats, watching Elijah excitedly show Amara's youngest daughter something on his phone, watching Grace laugh at something Marcus said, watching Amara's husband and his own head of estate security discussing football like old friends. A year ago, this garden had hosted engagement photos with Victoria, professionally staged, perfectly lit, utterly hollow in a way he hadn't even recognized until it was gone. Now it held something real. "You look deep in thought," came a voice beside him. It was Amara, holding a glass of lemonade, watching the same scene he was. "I was just thinking about how different my life looks now," Daniel said. "A year ago I thought I had everything. Turns out I had almost nothing that actually mattered." "You had good instincts," Amara said. "You stopped the car that day. A lot of people wouldn't have." "You told the truth that day," Daniel replied. "A lot of people wouldn't have done that either. Not with everything you had to lose." They stood in comfortable silence for a moment before Elijah came running over, tugging at Daniel's sleeve with the boundless energy only an 11-year-old possesses. "Daniel, come on, we're gonna do the thing with the sparklers before it gets too dark." "I'm coming," Daniel laughed, letting himself be pulled toward the long table full of people who, 1 year ago, hadn't been part of his life in any meaningful way, and who now felt like the only part of his life that truly mattered. As the sun began to set over the estate, casting the garden in warm gold light, Daniel Whitfield, a man once defined entirely by wealth, headlines, and a carefully curated image, found himself surrounded by something no fortune could have bought him. Family. Real one. Built not on image but on truth. That evening, after the guests had gone home and Elijah had fallen asleep in the guest room he now considered his own, Biscuit curled up loyally at the foot of his bed, Daniel sat alone on the back terrace, looking out over the quiet, moonlit garden. He thought about his father, about the letters hidden in that old desk drawer, about a man who had spent his final years quietly trying to make amends for a mistake before running out of time to finish what he started. Daniel understood now, in a way he hadn't before, that his father hadn't been a villain or a saint, just a man, flawed and human, who had loved deeply and failed sometimes, like everyone does. He thought about Victoria, and found, somewhat to his own surprise, that he no longer felt anger when her name crossed his mind. Just a quiet, sad understanding that some people build their lives around protecting an image, and in doing so lose the ability to ever truly connect with another person. He hoped, genuinely, that she would someday find whatever it was she'd actually been searching for, because clearly it hadn't been him. And he thought about Amara, a woman with far less power, far less money, and far more courage than most people he'd ever met in boardrooms full of powerful men. A woman who had chosen truth over safety, even when safety would have been so much easier. Because that's really what this whole story came down to, Daniel realized. Not wealth, not status, not the size of an estate or the number of zeros in a bank account. It came down to truth, and the courage it takes to speak it, even when silence would be so much safer. A single moment of honesty, from a woman crying against a stone wall in the rain, had unraveled years of buried lies, and in doing so, had given Daniel something money could never have bought him. A brother, a family, and a life built on something real instead of something performed. If there's one thing this story leaves us with, it's this. The truth may take time to surface, and sometimes it takes real courage to bring it forward, but it always finds its way into the light eventually. And when it does, it has the power to heal wounds we didn't even know were still open. So if you're carrying a truth today that feels too heavy, too scary to speak, I hope this story reminds you that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply say it out loud. You never know whose life you might change, including maybe your own. If this story touched your heart even a little, please hit that like button. It truly helps this channel more than you know. Subscribe if you'd love more stories like this one, and please, share it with someone who might need a little reminder today that the truth always finds its way home. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next story. Take care of yourselves.